What's up, guys? I am tired, but excited. Do I look tired? I think I look tired. I look pretty tired. It's a weird combination of emotions. I'm tired because I just finished writing a ton of awesome news stories for Apocryphal. And when I say a ton, I mean, well, you couldn't actually weigh them, but it's a lot. It's a lot of writing. But I'm excited because now I finally get to share it with you guys. 6 years ago, I came up with a drawing challenge called Apoctober, where I came up with 31 spooky designs that borrowed from the gothic and cosmic horror genres. At the time, there was very little to these illustrations, but as I worked, I began to come up with a story that connected them all. Since then, I've been adding on to the world with other drawing challenges like Mermaid, and I even came up with a loose concept for a collectible monster game for this setting. My thoughts and plans for the Enigmorphs, which is what I'm sort of calling the in-progress collectible monster project, have kind of changed a lot over the past year or so. I've created a lot of character designs, and I like them, but I've been sort of missing out on what I feel like made the original Apoctober so much fun. This year I was too busy to participate in the challenge that I came up with every day, though Claire has been making some awesome illustrations of her own following my prompt list. I haven't been idle though. I've been doing a lot of writing and some drawing of my own, and today, on All Hallows Eve, I'm finally ready to share it with you. When I say a lot of writing, again, listen to me very carefully here, because when I say a lot of writing, I mean a lot of writing. This is going to be a long ass video. Break out the hot apple cider and put on your favorite pajamas, because we're going to be here for a while. In a good way. Like, you'll want to stay here for a while. A lot of you like to have access to my finished illustrations for reference in your own projects, and I can't blame you. So if you're looking to find the illustrations that I've done in this video, look no further than my Unvale page. What's Unvale? Unvale is an online community for artists of all shapes and forms, and a longtime partner of our channel. It can feel bleak out there for aspiring artists, both professionals and hobbyists, and it's comforting to know that there is a safe, inclusive, and most importantly, AI-free site made by creatives for creatives. I've been using Unvale as a site to showcase my Enigmorph designs. You can upload work and organize it by world, artist, or title. I just updated my Lexia Nominatus so that it contains all of my finished Enigmorphs, including their text entries. Other artwork from the Apocryphal universe will be available for viewing there too, but shh, no spoilers. I'm a very visual person. Surprise, surprise. And for me, Unvale has the most exciting and best looking portfolio UI out of any site I've used. It's actually fun to upload and organize my works on this site. I can add all kinds of texts, character descriptions, and even color code my uploads however I see fit. Unvale is a great place to have your work be seen without the pressure and stress that social media platforms like Instagram and X can have on an artist. I keep trying to deny it, but Instagram is just not a great place to be an illustrator anymore. Fortunately, you can join the over 250,000 users on Unvale and make meaningful connections with other people who genuinely share your interests. What are you waiting for? It's 100% free. Check my link in the description and start creating today. Thank you so much to Unvale for continuing to sponsor our videos. I don't have a lot of long-term partners that I advertise consistently on this channel, and that's because I don't really feel comfortable with a lot of the things that advertisers want me to advertise on this channel. Unvale, though, they're cool. Make sure to check them out. Okay. Now that you know where to find all of my finished illustrations once this video is done, let's get on to the time-lapse footage of me making these illustrations and the writing that I did to accompany each one. As always, you can leave any questions that you have down in the comments. I always love answering those. Happy Apoctober! Enjoy the video. The wild Colonial had always been a gathering place for the sleepless workers of Providence's river port. Fishermen, sailors, merchants, and the occasional foreigner might find ample drink and whatever comfort a dimly lit tavern could provide. The ceilings were low, a common quirk of buildings erected in the 18th century. Indeed, as its name might suggest, the wild Colonial had been a fixture of Providence nightlife for over 150 years. The smoke from tobacco pipes, rolled cigarettes, and the odd cigar created a haunting gloom in the tavern. If one stepped inside from the hazy docks, they might have guessed the sea fog had followed them into the building. There were no electric lights. The only warmth came from a scattered few oil lamps that illuminated the bar and some tables. This air of obfuscation seemed intentional, as if the owners of the establishment had an understanding with their patrons that this was a place where a man could drink without being disturbed. Business could be conducted, plans set in motion, and all the while the Colonial would keep their secrets. Never more than a subdued din of murmured conversation could be heard from within, and the locals liked it this way. They also liked familiar faces, and shot unfriendly glares at strangers who happened to wander in. One night in late October, the door of the Wild Colonial was thrown open with a commanding thud, and the men at the bar looked up as if woken from a dream. Moonlight was pouring in, illuminating the dark corners of the room the meager oil lamps could not reach. A slender, rather well-dressed man stood holding the door ajar, and he surveyed the interior with black eyes that gleamed with an uncanny hunger. With a subtle gesture to someone unseen, the man moved aside with his back against the open door. Slowly, the light from the moon was eclipsed by a dark figure, tall and broad. His features were indiscernible, only a silhouette against the night sky. He had to stoop as he entered the tavern, and the floorboards creaked under his weight. All was silent now, but for the sound of heavy footsteps and an occasional cough from one of the patrons. Dozens of eyes followed the man as he crossed the room without a word or sign. His companion let the door close after them and followed only a few steps behind. The tavern was once again drowned in a hazy darkness. One of the men at the bar turned slowly as the newcomers passed. The light from the lamps shone in his eyes, glaring with a restrained but unmistakable loathing. The footsteps stopped, and the man loomed over one of the booths at the very back of the tavern. 3 fishermen were seated there, burly men with thick beards and weathered faces. An exceptionally dense cloud of tobacco smoke hung in the air around them, and they peered up at this unwelcome visitor with a less than friendly gaze. One man fingered a gutting knife that was hanging from his belt. The tall man said nothing, but reached into his jacket's breast pocket and produced a large, thick cigar. He clenched it in his teeth, then from another pocket he drew out an ornate and expensive-looking flint lighter. A sudden red glow illuminated his gray face, and the fishermen tensed as they caught a glimpse of his lifeless black eyes. They had seen eyes like this before. He took a long, slow drag off his cigar, and the end of it smoldered like hot coals in a furnace. Then he exhaled, and smoke billowed out from behind his unnaturally sharp teeth. One of the men seated swallowed hard and struggled to maintain composure. It must have been the dim light or the gloom. Perhaps lack of sleep was causing him to see things that weren't there, but it looked as if smoke also came from 5 slits on either side of the man's neck as he breathed. The fishermen exchanged a look of sudden understanding amongst one another, then hastily stood up, taking their drinks and moving as far away from the booth as they could.
"Well, how about that, Luke? Your favorite seat is open," the slender man said dryly from behind his companion.
"Some men have all the luck, eh, Cicero?" the other man retorted, his cigar wagging as he smiled. With this, he removed his hat and overcoat and hung them neatly from a hook on the booth. He slid into his seat, and Cicero handed him a newspaper. "Is our friend here yet?" he asked without looking up from his paper. He lit no lamp, but seemed to be able to read just fine by the light of his cigar.
"It's only a few minutes past the hour,"
Cicero replied as he examined a pocket watch.
"It may be that he arrived before us."
"Take a lap. Find him. I don't have all night, and unpleasant business puts me off my appetite. I would have this settled without further delay." He continued to leaf through the paper as if looking for something specific.
"Very good, sir."
And Cicero melted into the gloom of the tavern. Almost immediately, he was replaced at the booth by a small, balding man wearing a stained apron and cracked spectacles.
"Don Carcharodon, always a pleasure to have you. I see your favorite booth was open," the bartender squeaked,
His voice was nervous but genuine, like he had been anticipating the Don's arrival all night with a mixture of excitement and anxiety.
Harrison, the pleasure is all mine, Don Carcardon replied with a sincere smile and a puff of smoke.
Will you be having a drink tonight, sir? I have a barrel of Primitivo just off the boat. The only shipment on the East Coast, if you can believe it. The trading company had 3 ships that were to deliver to Boston, New York, and Charleston, but all ended up being rerouted right here to Providence. Imagine the luck.
Luck, indeed. Carcardon grinned knowingly and took another puff. But keep a cork in it for now, son. Alas, business comes first, and I must abstain until I see it done.
As you wish, Don Carcardon. If you need anything at all, just say the word.
With that, Harrison scurried back behind the bar with a satisfied grin on his face. He was humming gleefully to himself as he returned to his barkeeper's duties.
Hey, Harry.
Harrison polished a glass and admired its shine.
Harry!
A voice louder than was typical in this tavern shook Harrison out of his blissful trance. He looked up at one of the patrons at the bar, the man who had watched Don Carcardon so closely as he had first entered. His loathsome gaze was now fixed on the barkeep.
Did you say Carcardon? Luca Carcardon?
The man spoke softly, but did not conceal his malice.
Don Luca Carcardon, yes. He's here almost every Friday night,
Harrison replied, a bit irritably.
The nerve of that guy.
The man leaned back in his stool to look at the black shape that now seemed to fill the entire booth in the back of the tavern.
Fritz, no. I can tell what you're thinking, and I don't want any part of it.
Another patron sitting next to Fritz groaned without looking up from his drink.
Mickey, this man put us out of work. Put your father out of work. Your family's business stolen out from under you by some miser tyrant.
And what do you think you're going to do to change that? You're going to walk up to the richest man in the city and, what, sock him in the jaw?
Oh, what will he do? Pull out his piece and shoot me in front of all these people?
Fritz sneered and ground his teeth.
You should be so lucky,
Harrison murmured under his breath.
I'm not afraid of that oversized thug.
Fritz was shifting in his seat now, his fists clenched tightly as if he had already made up his mind.
Fritz, listen to me very carefully.
The man called Mickey turned now and stared intently at his companion.
If you go over there, if you talk to him, I don't know you. You mention my name, if you so much as gesture in my direction, I will look the other way. We are not friends. We've never even met.
He said these last words slowly and with dire sincerity, as if explaining to a child why it's dangerous to grab hot coals from a fire.
But Mickey,
I'm serious, Fritz. You make this choice for yourself. If you've got some unresolved matter of pride you need to exercise, by all means. But don't act as if you're doing me a favor. He turned back to his drink with a look of frustration and disappointment on his face. Fritz gazed at him for a moment, then threw back the rest of his pint and stood up noisily. Mickey sighed and passed a hand over his eyes. Fritz stomped proudly to the back of the room.
Carcardon! Luca Carcardon?
Fritz now stood before the cloudy booth, his fists balled and his face screwed up with anger. Carcardon didn't look up. He didn't even seem to notice the man who stood only a foot beside him. He continued to puff at his cigar and flip through the evening paper. The ominous red light that illuminated his face pulsed like a slowly beating heart.
Hey, pal, I'm talking to you.
Fritz took a step closer and placed a hand on the table.
Is your name Luca Carcardon?
At this, the Don's black eyes shifted from his reading to the man's hand that had managed to invade his peripheral vision. Almost undetectable, a sneer tugged at his thin lips, and he shifted his cigar from one jagged corner of his mouth to another. He looked up suddenly, and Fritz instinctively removed his hand from the table as if to keep it from being bitten off by some wild animal. He straightened himself and cleared his throat, but took a step away from the booth.
I think you know me, sir. Name's Francis Kyle.
I worked for Carpenna and Sons, the fishing company operating out of India Point. Sound familiar to you? Carcardon said nothing, but stared blankly at Fritz as if he was still determining if he should acknowledge the man at all.
He exhaled a large plume of smoke directly in the man's face, and Fritz repressed a cough. Paulino Carpena ran that company for 50 years, came here with nothing but his name, and started a business that employed over 25 honest, hard-working men, including his own son. Suddenly, you come in like the bottom feeder you are and buy the man's business right out from under him. You force him into retirement, then fire off everyone on his payroll, including me and my good friends. At this, Fritz threw a hand behind him towards his drinking companion at the bar. A quick glance revealed that, true to his word, Mickey sat with his back towards Fritz, without so much as a nod in his direction. Fritz shifted his feet uneasily, but cleared his throat and continued. You've got gall coming into this place, where so many of the men you put out of work come to escape the tribulations of their everyday lives. You sit here in your Italian suit smoking your Cuban cigars while the rest of us struggle to put food on the table, and you think yourself above it all. Big, tough man, aren't you? Fritz spat at the Don's feet. How'd you feel if every man you've ever done wrong came at you at once, I wonder? Wouldn't feel so high and mighty then, would you? At this, the other patrons began to look up from their conversations. The three fishermen Carcharodon had displaced turned around in their seats. An uneasy quiet befell the wild Colonial, and now all but Mickey and the bartender were staring in the direction of the booth in the back of the room. Got anything to say for yourself, Don? Fritz jeered sarcastically, now invigorated by the silent support of dozens of men at his back. Carcharodon chewed at the end of his cigar thoughtfully, then removed it from his mouth and placed it gently in an ashtray. He folded his paper and looked back up at Fritz. His gaze had softened, as if he was starting to nod off. Yes, he mumbled dreamily. Fritz furrowed his brow, seeming both confused and infuriated. He opened his mouth to speak again, but the Don continued. Yes, I do know you. Carpena Fishing Company, a recent acquisition, if I recall correctly. Yes, of course. I had a long talk with the old man, Paulino. Good fellow, hard worker. It's not easy for a man of foreign blood to make a living in this town, yet he managed better than most. Wasn't until recently that the company became Carpena and Sons, though. Old Paulie felt it was right to let his firstborn in on the business. Michael, wasn't that his name? Now Carcharodon shifted his gaze so that he was looking behind the confrontational Fritz, staring hungrily at the only man at the bar who refused to look at him. Yeah, Mickey, my closest friend, Fritz said through gritted teeth. Hey, I'm talking to you, tough guy. How's about you meet my eyes instead of looking around for more trouble? Carcharodon's eyes snapped back to meet Fritz. Black and hollow they were, like the eyes of a doll. So dark, so colorless, that in the dim light from the lamp on the table, Fritz could see his own face reflected in them as if he was staring into dark pools of still water. He was surprised, in his raucous fervor, to see the man in those eyes appear so weak and frail. Had he not presented himself more confidently? It seemed so in the heat of the moment, but now he was plagued with doubt. I gave Paulino Carpena more money for his business than he had to show for a half-century of back-breaking work. Now the man can enjoy the last few years of his life in comfort, without the stresses of running a business eating away at his mind and body. Carcharodon reached for his cigar and started smoking again. And as for young Mickey, I simply forced him to face his own incompetence. At his age, his father was a stranger in a foreign land, fighting for the mere privilege to work a 12-hour shift. Now his progeny benefits from his decades of toil merely because he was born into the business. If he was fit to work for my fishing company, another employer would have made him an offer by now. Shift manager, a prestigious title and yet so undeserved of one such as him. Indeed, if Paulino had not been the boy's father, he would have been no different a month ago than he is now, a destitute drunk, wasting away in some dingy bar. Mickey shifted in his seat but did not turn around. Fritz seized with anger and took another step towards the booth while a few other men in the tavern rose to their feet. Fritz tensed his muscles as if straining against some invisible tether and would neither speak nor act. The onlookers waited for the inevitable confrontation. But my judgment is not infallible, Carcharodon continued with a pensive grin on his face. It would appear that I have misjudged you, Francis Kyle. Suddenly, the Don rose to his feet and was standing face to face with his agitator. Fritz was forced to step back once again and crane his neck to meet the towering man's eyes. Some of the other men who had stood up in support of Fritz were now slowly returning to their seats. Fritz struggled in spite of himself to stay resolute, but his eyes betrayed a facade of confidence. Carcharodon smiled broadly, revealing what appeared to be several rows of unnaturally triangular teeth.
The men I hired to replace you at Carpina Fishing Company are trustworthy but inexperienced. Moreover, they lack motivation, and that you possess in spades. Perhaps in my haste to relieve the previous owner of his burdens, I did away with too many of the company's integral components. He removed his cigar and pointed it at Fritz. How would you like to come back on as acting manager for the day shift? Whip my boys into shape and prove your worth to the business. If the general manager I've appointed likes what he sees, I'll make sure that you're compensated handsomely in years to come.
Carcharodon extended a meaty gray hand towards Fritz, who instinctively backed away. The rest of the tavern was deafened by an anxious silence. Fritz said nothing, but turned back to look at Mickey. Despite all he had said, everything he had risked for his lifelong companion, Fritz saw that the man remained unmoved, hunched over his drink at the bar without so much as a backwards glance. Fritz looked back up at the man before him, so tall now that his face had faded into the dark clouds that hung in the air of the tavern. All that could be seen was the light of the lamps shining weakly in the Don's eyes, two minuscule points of light staring down at him from the gloom. Fritz swallowed hard and wiped his brow.
I want $1.60 an hour, and guaranteed overtime pay,
Fritz demanded quietly. From within the swirling darkness, Fritz thought he saw the shimmer of white teeth curling into a smile below the 2 points of light. The Don nodded. Slowly, Fritz reached out and gripped Carcharodon's hand.
Good deal,
Carcharodon grunted and shook the man's hand firmly.
Now, pay your tab and get some sleep. I'd have you well rested for your first day back on the job. Bright and early tomorrow morning, ask for Fletcher on the docks. He'll set you right.
Yes, sir, said Fritz with the dutiful cadence of a weary soldier. He turned on the spot, walked past the bar, and put some money on the counter without a word to Mickey. Then he was gone, out the door and into the cold, moonlit night. The crowd murmured amongst themselves and settled back in their seats, looking from one another to the ominous figure that now stood silently in the darkness. The smile slowly faded from Carcharodon's face as the tavern door swung closed, and he returned to his seat with a labored sigh. No sooner had he sat down than Cicero reappeared with a young, pale-faced man dressed in city clothes by his side.
Can't a man read in peace any more, Cicero? Carcharodon breathed exasperatedly as he once again unfolded his evening paper.
Time was when people would mind their own business in the Colonial. Say the word, Don, and I'll make sure these men stay in their seats.
Cicero hissed maliciously. Carcharodon seemed to ignore this offer, but looked up sideways at the young man beside him.
This must be the man of the hour. Come, sit down. I'm hungry, and my dinner continues to be waylaid by ceaseless interruptions.
Oh, do they serve food here? The young man inquired, looking from Carcharodon to Cicero. Cicero pointed at the seat opposite his employer. The young man hurried to sit down, but looked up once he had.
Will you be joining us?
He asked Cicero, but the slender man stood facing away from the table, blocking the way out.
He doesn't mind standing, replied the Don. Come now, let's be done with this.
The newcomer looked a bit concerned, but carried on.
Right. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carcharodon. I'm sure you know your reputation precedes you. Nary a more successful entrepreneur has this town ever seen. You're truly an inspiration to us all.
What a well-spoken young man. You'd make a half-decent writer.
The Don grinned.
Funny you should say that.
The man gestured hesitantly at the paper in Carcharodon's hands.
Cover story, the Door murder case, written and reported by Bert Lemlet. That's me.
Carcharodon admired the front page of his paper, nodding slowly.
I thought I found your speech familiar. Now I know why. Excellent reporting, my boy. I dare say you've kept this rag afloat with your pieces.
Especially this most recent coverage of the grisly death of old Richard Dorr. Nasty business, that. But you've covered every last detail. You even got photographs printed. No doubt that cost you a shiny penny to have done."
Bert blushed and tugged at his ear bashfully.
All part of the job, sir. I know a man in town with a daguerreotyped camera, and he leases it to me for a small fee.
Money well spent. You can't put a price on information, that's what I always say. But for all your diligence, there's a glaring discrepancy in your reporting.
Carcharodon's tone shifted from jubilant to gravely serious. He flattened the paper on the table and turned it to face the writer. With a thick finger like a gnarled tree branch, he pointed at the article in question.
"What's that date, Reed?"
the Don inquired softly. Bert leaned forward and squinted in the dim light.
The 26th of October, the date of the murder,"
the young man replied. Carcharodon nodded and flipped to the front page. He pressed hard with a single finger at the top of the cover.
"And what, pray tell, does that read?"
Well, this is this evening's paper, sir. The date is October the 29th, 1881.
A somewhat egregious oversight, wouldn't you say? If there's one thing I'd expect to be accurate in an article covering a murder, it would be the date of the man's death.
Oh, well, that date is accurate, sir. Professor Dorr was found dead in the early hours of October 26th.
So, you only just heard of this news today, then?
No, sir. I was there with the police at the scene of the crime. The only reporter, too. Woke up in the dead of night with a hunch that there was something going on somewhere in town and followed my instincts up to College Hill. Sure enough, about a half-dozen officers and one very frightened housekeeper crowded the manor at Benefit and Benevolent Street.
Now Carcharodon's face was grim. His cigar hung limply from his mouth, and he stared at Bert with a look of growing agitation. Bert continued.
I would have printed the story that very same day, but I wanted all the facts. The cops had arrested one Juno Mason, the housekeeper to the victim, as she was the last one to see Dorr alive. But I didn't buy it, sir. I mean, if she had wanted to kill the man and get away with it, why would she call the police at all? I spent the next 3 days getting stories from the chief of police, the detective in charge of the case, and the accused, as I'm sure you read in my article. Mason is a sweet woman and loved the old man dearly. She's scared half to death, you know. She thinks they'll lock her away forever, or worse. But at the risk of editorializing, I don't think she did it. The evidence is...
I don't care about Juno Mason or what the cops think happened to the old coot,
Carcharodon interrupted in a growling whisper. Bert looked taken aback by the sudden change in mannerism.
You're a reporter. It's your job to get the story out so people know what's happening when it's happening.
Of course, sir, but
do you know who owns the paper you write for, Mr. Lemnett?
Well, my editor-in-chief is Theodore Morris.
Not your boss. Your boss's boss.
No, sir, I do not.
Carcharodon leaned back in his seat and pinched the bridge of his nose between his forefinger and thumb. Cicero suddenly turned around to face the table, and a wave of realization and terror swept over Bert.
Oh, Mr. Carcharodon, sir, if this is your way of disciplining your employees, then consider the message well received. My priorities can and will be adjusted. You have my word on that. No further delay on pressing headlines. I'll be sure to hand over my reports to the editor as soon as I have a first draft.
Bert was sweating profusely now, and he dabbed his mouth with a handkerchief from his jacket pocket. Carcharodon leaned forward again and sighed.
Unfortunately, it will have to be to another editor that you hand your drafts. As for 1 hour ago, Mr. Morris has been relieved of his position at the evening paper.
I don't know that it's fair for the editor-in-chief to be fired on account of my mistake, gasped Bert.
I'm glad you feel that way. You're fired as well.
With that, Cicero laid a surprisingly strong hand on Bert's shoulder and hoisted him out of his seat. He grabbed him by the arm and escorted him swiftly out the door. The scrawny writer could barely complete a sentence before he reached the other side of the room, only managing to raise a finger in protest before being shoved outside. The crowd of the Wild Colonial paid little heed to this occurrence. This was not the first time a man had been forcefully ejected from the tavern, nor was it the most violent that they had seen such an act performed. After the confrontation between Fritz and the Don, this was almost a welcome return to normalcy. Cicero returned to the booth and sat in the empty seat across from his employer.
Right. I need a new editor and a new head reporter for the evening paper. Carcharodon sounded exasperated as he addressed Cicero. Talk to Abigail about the editor. She'll know someone who can handle that job. But I need the position filled by tomorrow. As for the reporter, just put any of our guys on it who knows how to write.
Our guys, scoffed Cicero. All due respect, Luke, but if we have a writer anywhere on our payroll, I'll eat my hat.
I don't need a writer. I need a bloodhound. Richard Dorr has been dead for almost 3 days, and I'm just learning about it now. Time is of the essence. We can't afford to miss out on any news that passes through this town.
Why not hire a PI? Isn't it better to keep information like this to ourselves?
I have eyes and ears all over this town, and yet this news eluded me till it showed up in this evening's paper. Why not have the press working for me? But if they're going to print it, better to have a writer who won't dig deeper than is good for him. Lemlet was a good reporter, too good. A story like this one is better told in brief to the masses, and let the people who matter uncover the whole truth for themselves.
Understood, Don. Then what's our next move concerning Dorr? If this Mason lady really did off the old man, we ought to have a few words with her.
Carcharodon snapped his fingers towards the bar, and Harrison hurried over like an eager dog. Tell you what, Harrison, I will have a glass of that Primitivo, a little pre-dinner wine.
Excellent, sir. I'll have that for you in but a moment.
The bartender shuffled off through a doorway that led to the cellar. Carcharodon leaned in towards his companion and lowered his voice to a whisper. She didn't do it, that much I know. But I want to see her, ask her a few questions. She may know more than she's told Lemlet or the cops. Talk to the commissioner. He owes me a favor. They're only keeping her behind bars because they need a patsy. This is a high-profile case, and my guess is the police are stumped.
I can get Needlenose over to the station tonight. Should I arrange a ride home for her once we've finished our talk?
Harrison reappeared with a wine glass, more like a fishbowl than any normal drinking vessel. He carried it with both hands and offered it to the gray man at the booth. Carcharodon lifted the glass to his lips and drank deeply. He sighed contentedly and ran his tongue over his sharp teeth, now stained a deep red. That won't be necessary. I'd like to have us stay for dinner. A flash, and the drawn-out whine of a photograph camera startled the passers-by wandering outside of Naniwaya Shoten, a small shop known throughout Tokyo for its unique sweets. People stopped and stared as a man and woman posed in front of the photographer. The man was tall, pale-faced, and appeared older and more well-worn than he actually was. His hair was red, unusual for this part of the world, and swept back as if the ocean wind was forever blowing in his face. He wore a heavy black coat and the thick boots of a sailor. The woman next to him was considerably shorter, but equal in stature. She carried herself with confidence and authority, but currently sported a childlike grin as she clutched an elaborate pastry for the photo. She too stood out in the crowd, with dark skin and facial tattoos that garnered distasteful looks from the locals. She wore what appeared to be a coat and a cape made from the skin of a seal, with thick fur cuffs around her wrists and neck. The cape was affixed around her shoulders by a large, curved tooth. "I think I had my mouth full," the man choked and swallowed. "You didn't tell me when he would take the photo." "In every photograph I've seen, the subjects appear as lifeless as taxidermy. This one will be all the more authentic for your stuffed face." The woman giggled and put a gentle hand on her companion's shoulder. She turned and bowed to the photographer, who smiled as he packed up his equipment. "Arigato gozaimasu." "That's it." "Figures, the first photograph I've ever had taken of myself, and I'm choking on... What did you call this again?" "The locals call it Imagawa Yaki, and that shoot was expensive. Next time we visit Japan, you can pay for the photos and take as many as you like." The man with the camera handed her a small piece of yellow paper and bowed, saying something in his native language. "He says we can pick up the prints from the shop tomorrow," the woman translated. "Not too late, I hope. We're to get an early start in the morning while the tides are still high." "Oh, let's worry about that when the time comes. Don't you ever stop to appreciate the moment?" The woman smiled softly and gripped the man's arm. "Come, there's so much more I want to show you before we go." Argyle couldn't help but smile back. For all his time at sea, hardened by foul winds and fouler company, Miro was still able to bring some warmth to his heart. He always admired how, despite their similarities, the grueling years of life on the waves had not broken her as they had for himself. The last few months had seemed all the easier with her as his captain, and for that moment he felt at peace. But still something troubled him. Amongst so many other haunting memories, one in particular lurked in his subconscious. He had been waiting to bring it up with Mira, but now in the light of day, surrounded by a bustling crowd, it felt inappropriate to burden her with his troubles. Mira knew, of course. She was perceptive and a good judge of character. It's part of what made her such an apt captain. For her, Argyle was an open book, though he thought himself secretive. Ever since they had made port in Tokyo Bay, he had been acting strangely. At first she let it be, trusting her first mate would confide in her his woes eventually. Now she worried that the unspoken unpleasantness was festering within him, as was so often the case. "Come, let's sit for a while and let our stomachs work," she suggested, and led him by the arm down the busy street and towards a small patch of trees and grass. They hurried across tracks as a trolley screeched along, its bell ringing loud and clear among the sound of the crowds. When they reached the green space, they knelt there beneath a tree, its leaves yellow and clinging to their branches amidst the autumn wind. Argyle leaned against the trunk and looked up at the sky. Gulls were circling and screeching overhead. He sighed and struggled to allow himself to relax. Mira knelt close beside him, looking worried. He felt her staring at her, and a wave of frustration washed over him and then passed. Of course, she knew. "Is everything all right, Argyle?" she inquired. Argyle sighed. "Right as rain, Captain," he replied. "What did you think of the Imagawa Yaki?" Mira asked with a weak smile. "The man who makes it here does it special, with the batter molded into the shape of a fish. Have you ever seen such a thing?" "No, indeed," Argyle responded, avoiding Mira's gaze, but a smile creased his face. "When I first came to Tokyo, I tried these sweets. I knew when we first met that you would love them, and I am glad to have been able to share them with you." Argyle turned his head slightly and gave Mira a puzzled look. "How many times before have you been to Japan?" "Oh, this would be my third time in Tokyo. My crew and I have sailed these waters before." "Why here? Why so often? Surely not just for the fish-shaped pastries." "You know, of course," Mira replied earnestly, and her grin faded. "My hunt for the Crown of Thorns began long before we met, though now we seek her together." Argyle straightened up and rotated to face Mira. "But to come here a third time? Have you not already exhausted the possibility that Flos hides somewhere in these waters?" "Well, one can never be sure of something like that. It's not like fishing an ice hole until all the trout have been caught. Flos is ever changing, ever moving. Though we have not found her yet, here she may still dwell. We will circle the globe as many times as need be." Argyle looked unhappy with this answer. He slumped back against the tree and stared with a furrowed brow up at the birds circling ahead. "I saw something yesterday, in the afternoon as we sailed into port," Argyle said suddenly, eyes fixed up at the sky. Mira was still, trying not to look surprised that Argyle had opened up so voluntarily. "A whale, huge, biggest I've ever seen. Pale like a dead man, pink and grey. It passed by the boat away from shore, and it exhaled a plume of salty mist as it broke the surface. I was taken aback by its appearance, by its unnatural colour, but more unnerving still were its eyes. Milky white they were, set deep in the beast's head and surrounded by cracked and wrinkled skin." "All whales have wrinkled skin," Mira offered softly. "Aye, they do, but even in the most tired, aged eyes of the largest whales I've seen purpose, they are never lost. They seem to travel aimlessly through the infinite blue abyss, but look into a whale's eyes and you will know their errand. They are at home in the unknown, happy to wander until they find their road's end." More seagulls were gathering overhead. They were near the docks, and perhaps a fishing vessel had just made port. Something was exciting these birds. Mira looked up anxiously, following Argyle's gaze. "This whale was different. It was lost," he murmured, and passed a hand over his eyes. I saw in it a look of desperation, of exhaustion. Whatever it had been looking for, or wherever it had once thought it was going, was now long gone. It knew it, yet it swam on. It was dying, killing itself from the effort of pushing its ancient body against the tides. Mira looked concerned. I saw no whale, nor did I hear mention of it from any of the crew. Argyle shot a hard look at Mira, who raised her hands defensively. Not that I doubt what you saw. You and I are no strangers to the unnatural, especially out at sea, but we know now that our visions are often more than what might appear to be. Tell me then, Captain, Argyle said, not breaking eye contact. What did I see? Suddenly, the birds overhead fell silent. They stopped screeching, and as one, turned in the air and flew off eastwards. Both Mira and Argyle stood up at once. There were people moving in a hurried rush in the direction the birds flew. First a dozen, then more, soon a crowd pushing against one another down the street towards the water. Mira stopped one of the city folk and asked them something in Japanese. Argyle, fixed on the horizon to the east, started walking with the crowd. Argyle, listen to this. This woman says that... She looked around, realizing that her friend was no longer by her side. She caught a glimpse of red hair amidst the sea of black and called out, but the din from the excited throng drowned out her voice. She pushed her way through the rabble and was nearly swept away. Argyle was moving quickly now, shoving people aside and breaking out into a run. He found a side road and cut off from the group, darting down alleyways and following some indescribable urge that led him closer and closer to the shore. Finally, he found himself stumbling over a stone wall onto a beach where the crowd had finally stopped. There, at the water's edge, a massive shape loomed over the anxious onlookers. It was a whale, pale and pink as if wearing human skin stretched thin over its massive bones. The gulls circled hungrily overhead, and some had already begun landing on the carcass. Anger and sorrow filled Argyle's veins, and he lunged forward, waving his arms. Get back! Get back, all of you! Step away! The people stared at him, befuddled by his uncanny outburst. He reached a man who had stooped by the whale's stomach with a large knife. Before Argyle could stop him, he plunged the blade into the flesh of the beast and began to carve. Argyle grabbed the man violently by the shoulders and pulled him away. This thing is not dead, he shouted at the top of his lungs. Stay your blade, butcher! Are there not enough fish in this foul city for you to gorge yourself on without cutting up this poor creature? He grabbed the man's wrist and gripped it tightly, and the poor man cried out in pain as the knife fell from his hand. Argyle! Mira called out from the crowd, still pushing her way towards the whale. Argyle, stop! He can't understand you. Please, stop! Argyle released his hold on the man and turned towards Mira. It's not dead. We can get it back out to sea. Tell these people to push from behind. Mira looked at her first mate with tears on her face. The whale turned a bleached eye to glance at Mira. Argyle stared at the whale. We can move it. We just need some ropes or a cart. Are there any horses in this town? He whipped around to ask the man he had assaulted, and he cowered in fear. Argyle. Mira came and put a hand on his back. There's nothing we can do. Let these people enjoy their fortune. A beached whale could feed many poor families for weeks. Argyle shook his hand free and took another look into the moon-like eyes of the creature. It looked up at the sky to avoid his gaze. Argyle kicked at the sand and turned around, leaving a crowd of confused and frightened onlookers in his wake. Mira stood staring as Argyle stormed away, and the people knocked into her as they passed with knives and baskets clutched in their hands. Argyle walked for what felt like hours. All the while people passed him in the opposite direction, law officials and reporters likely headed towards the beach where the whale still lay. An exciting and historic day this would be for the people of Tokyo. A strange occurrence worthy of national news. Argyle could not rid his mind of the thought of those mournful white eyes. Why would it not look at him? As his mind raced and his feet carried him forward, he neglected to look up. He bumped into a large man and nearly fell backwards, but a strong arm reached out and righted him. Easy there, sailor.
A familiar voice met Argyle's ears.
Been looking for you.
It was Gushglen, one of Mira's crew. He was a hulking mass of a man with broad shoulders and thick, muscular arms. Though the air was cold, he wore no shirt, and his scarred and sculpted body caught the eyes of many a wandering Tokyo resident.
I need a moment, Gushglin, Argyle said under his breath.
How's that? That doesn't matter. Telegram for you. Funny little guy brought it to the boat. Guess they knew you were here. Ain't the modern world of technology something? That message come from all the way in the States, Rhode Island, as it were. How they what sent it knew where you would be, I couldn't guess, but I'd have a look at it as soon as maybe.
Argyle took the paper from his shipmate's meaty hands. He raised an eyebrow suspiciously. Have you looked at this, Gushglin? Argyle inquired, waving the paper before him.
Well, I mean, it had to be checked to make sure it was translated properly. Of course, I don't speak Japanese half as well as the captain, but, well, as it turns out, the man at the telegram station knows English like a native speaker, so me reading it wasn't entirely necessary.
Gushglin continued to babble as Argyle unfolded the paper and read through carefully. From the desk of Raleigh White, stop. To Argyle Finch, care of Captain Mira Dakla, stop. Concerning the recent death of your father, Richard Dorr, stop. You have been named in your father's will, stop. Please return to Providence, Rhode Island as soon as possible, stop. Your inheritance will be disclosed in person, stop.
But I hardly remember now what I saw in the first place.
Gushglin had continued speaking, though Argyle had all but tuned him out. He finished reading the telegram and looked up at Gushglin, who blushed.
My condolences.
He rubbed the back of his head bashfully. Argyle pushed past him and towards the dock.
Hey, where are you going? And where's the captain? Ain't you two go off together?
Now Argyle's head was so plagued with turbulent thoughts that he could barely process his physical senses. The bells of the ships at the nearby docks echoed in his mind and mixed with the shrieking cries of gulls. They were laughing at him. No, crying for him. Men walked past him carrying crates, dead fish, dead fathers. Their eyes were white like those of the whale. He could smell the sea, but it was different from the one he remembered, tepid and odorless like old bath-water. He shivered. He stumbled over a coil of rope that lay at the edge of one of the docks, falling flat on his face so that he nearly toppled into the bay. He saw himself reflected in the grey water, but his visage was old and withered. His hair was grey and his eyes were sunk in deep, dark circles of cracked and wrinkled skin. It seemed so familiar. He found himself reaching out towards the water with one arm. His reflection remained unmoved.
Nani shiteru?
A voice came from somewhere behind him.
Tachiagare. Orokoma no. Fumitsuke rare ozo.
Then Argyle felt a hand grip the collar of his jacket, and he was hoisted to his feet. A man stood there clad in what Argyle assumed must be the trappings of a Japanese sea captain. He was shorter than Argyle, but no less imposing for his height. He glared up at the foreigner with a look of exasperated concern, like a father who must scold his child for playing in the streets. "Are you a ship captain?" Argyle said, almost inaudibly.
"Kari wa watashi no gengo hanasanai. Ororoki wa shanai,"
the man responded as if to himself. "I'm sorry,
Yes, I am a captain."
Argyle felt somewhat embarrassed that the man spoke his language, but he himself knew not a word of Japanese. "Would you or any other captains you know of happen to be sailing across the Pacific to the United States? I'm in desperate need of passage home." The captain looked Argyle up and down as if assessing this claim for himself. He nodded sharply and gestured for Argyle to follow him. Then he turned on the spot and began walking down the dock.
"You should have returned home long ago, I think,"
the man said, still facing away from Argyle as he led on. "I think so too," Argyle responded as he followed.
"I will do what I can to help you."
The captain led Argyle to a large building where the docks converged. The two men entered and disappeared from view. Not far away, at the ends of one of the adjoining docks, foreign men loaded cargo onto a medium-sized steam vessel. Among them, a great shirtless man could be seen hoisting a barrel over one of his shoulders. He waved at a small woman who appeared from the crowd, hurrying along the dock towards the ship.
"There you are, Captain,"
Gushglin shouted heartily.
"Been wondering when you'd turn up."
"Have you seen Argyle?" Mira asked, somewhat out of breath.
"I have. Not more than an hour ago I bumped into him somewhere on the pier. He had a message from back in the States, something about a death in the family. but he took off before I could ask him more. No telling where he's got to now.
Mira ran her fingers through her hair with an exasperated look on her face.
Is something the matter, Captain? We're still planning on setting sail at first light, eh?
Gushklin hoisted the barrel over his head and onto the ship. Mira removed a piece of crumpled yellow paper from the folds of her coat. Perhaps it was only a matter of time, she thought to herself. Argyle was eccentric, unpredictable. He often had visions that filled his head with dark and confusing thoughts. All his life he struggled to make sense of it all, but with Mira by his side, things were finally becoming clear, or so she thought. But perhaps, despite all they shared and all the time they spent together, Argyle was no closer to sanity than he had been when they first met. And there was no time to indulge him in this emotional state, not again. More than once before he had waylaid their voyages due to these episodes, and too often had Mira set aside her duties as captain to console him. What for? Did it make him a better crewman? Were they any closer to finding the crown of thorns? No, I shall waste no more of my time with this man. She clenched her fist, and the paper in her hand creased and folded into a tight ball. No need to wait. It would seem that Argyle will no longer be joining us on our voyage. We spoke earlier today, and I detected his fortitude failing. We are better off. She marched past Gushklin with her head down, and something small and yellow fell from her hand as she walked. Get ready to make sail. Gushklin looked perplexed for a moment, then looked behind him longingly. Oi, Gushklin! Let's be on with it, Mira barked from the deck of her ship. All softness had left her voice. With a sigh, Gushklin gathered up the remaining cargo that lay on the dock and hoisted it across the gangplank. The engine of the vessel blazed to life below deck, and steam bellowed out from the stacks. Weigh anchor! We're off! Mira shouted from the helm. Her motley crew scurried across the deck, unprepared for this sudden change in plans.
Is everything all right, Captain?
Gushklin asked as he crossed the quarterdeck. Right as rain, sailor, she responded, her eyes set on the horizon. The other ships in the harbor clanged their bells, and shouts could be heard from the men on board as the killer whale pulled out from the dock with unprecedented haste. Her wake sent smaller vessels rolling in the waves, and one man fell overboard and swore loudly in his native tongue. The strange vessel broke out into the bay and off towards the southern seas. It would not be seen by the people of Tokyo again. I am sorry I could book you no sooner passage. The captain escorted Argyle out of the Port Authority building. The red-headed man was looking sullen and worn, like a man cursed with sleeplessness. He clutched a ticket in one hand. You have done more for me than I could have hoped for, Argyle responded, extending a hand to the captain. Tomorrow's departure means I may see to some unfinished business before I go. Truly, I cannot thank you enough. The captain looked at the man's hand for a moment, then smiled grimly. He shook it, then returned inside the building without another word. Argyle passed a hand over his face and sighed. The sun was getting low, and the gulls overhead were still shrieking gleefully. He glared up at them, wishing they would fall dead from the sky and mock him nevermore. He walked slowly down to the docks where the killer whale was anchored. He would apologize to Mira, as he had done so many times before, but never again would he plague her with his worries. Tomorrow morning they would go their separate ways, his search for the crown of thorns, or whatever he pretended to be looking for, now at an end. But first he would hold her hand, look her in the eye, and thank her sincerely for everything she had done for him. She deserved at least that much. He was still lost in thought when he found himself at the end of the dock where he had left the killer whale. A small fishing boat now sat low in the water in her stead. A fisherman, drenched in seawater, climbed up onto the dock, murmuring angrily under his breath. Excuse me, sir. Argyle hurried up to the man, who shot him a rather unfriendly look. Did you see a large ship here? 3-mast and a steam engine? He spat back something in Japanese. Argyle didn't know what he said, but the man's disdain needed no translation. He waved a wet hand at Argyle and stomped off down the docks. He watched him go, then noticed something stuck between 2 planks of wood. He reached down to pick it up, a small, crumpled piece of yellow paper. His eyes widened as he turned to face the sea. The sky was orange with the setting sun, and in the distance he could see a plume of steam rise from the horizon.
It's outrageous.
It's unexpected. It's conjecture, and we should not act on it before we know more. 3 individuals sat at a long table in a room with slanted ceilings and lined on all sides with bookshelves and display cases. The table was made of rich mahogany and embellished with ornamental carvings around its edges and legs. At its center, a symbol was embossed in the shape of a triangle with 3 distinct icons depicted on each corner. The round window at the far end of the room, as well as the 2 tall windows that protruded from the slanted ceilings on either side, were shuttered tightly, so that it was impossible to tell whether it was day or night. A gas chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow about the room. At the far end of the table, facing away from the only door into the room, sat a short man with brown skin and dark hair. He wore oversized spectacles that made his eyes seem much bigger than they were, and was dressed in a collared shirt with an emerald green vest. On the table before him were scattered many papers and few open books, as well as a quill and an inkwell. Adjacent to him, on the north end of the table facing one of the slanted walls, a very proud and elegant woman sat with her arms folded neatly across her lap. Her skin was so pale and smooth that when she sat still it appeared as if she was a porcelain doll. Indeed, her hair and makeup were those of a typical Victorian aristocrat, and her black eyes were glassy and emotionless. Behind her, almost concealed by the darkness, a stout man, wearing a monocle and dressed as a servant, stood at attention, equally unmoving as his mistress. Across from her, in the chair facing away from the southernmost side of the room, was another woman. Her hair was as red as autumn leaves, and trimmed short. She looked older than the other 2, but perhaps decades of scowling had aged her beyond her years. Even now her face was knitted into a contentious grimace, and both her fists were balled on the table. Within her reach sat a glass bottle and an ornate tumbler filled with some bright green liquor. She was dressed as a serviceman, a beige uniform that sported the same insignia emblazoned on the table.
It's been 3 days, Oliver,
the red-headed woman shot back at the short man, who was fidgeting with his quill.
What have you been doing in that time to prove or disprove the rumors?
This is nothing short of a spectacular mystery, Oliver replied, looking down at the table. There is little I can do to uncover the truth with the prime suspect in police custody and the body interred. Truthfully, the circumstances of Dor's death are inconsequential, at least at this juncture. The pale woman at the other end of the table spoke up in a high voice. Araminta, nothing will come of your verbal assaults on Oliver save for further despair and deeper grief. We are all hurting, you know.
Aye, but I bet you'd hurt a little bit less if you knew where the old man's money was going, wouldn't you, Abigail?
Araminta spat back with a sadistic sneer. She took a swig of her green liquor. I find it quite telling that your mind is so immovably fixed on this presumed inheritance. Is it possible that you, my darling Araminta, expect some restitution for your years of service as head watchdog for the HHC? Abigail, please, Oliver interjected, and raised a hand towards Araminta, who looked ready to climb across the table. We all know that Dor would not want his death to drive us apart. We must remain a unified front. Now more than ever, the city and its people are in grave danger. We must not forget our errand.
Look at the young assistant to the head researcher, so proud and cocksure now, aren't you? When a week ago you couldn't even look me in the eye. Now the man in charge is gone, and suddenly you find the stones to give us orders. I know my errand, boy. I don't need you to remind me.
Araminta now turned her fury towards Oliver, and he shrunk back in his chair. I only meant, he began, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. That must be Raleigh. Abigail piped up and craned her unusually long neck towards the door. Mr. Mulligan, would you please let him in? The man behind her snapped to attention and waddled clumsily over to the door without a word. Standing several feet from it, the butler stretched an arm the full distance to the door and pulled it open. Silently, he turned around and stumbled back towards Abigail, his arms flopping limply by his side. Oh, lucky me, the man who entered scoffed sarcastically. Araminta's drinking.
Watch it, desk jockey,
Araminta growled as Raleigh White approached the table. He was a pale man with small spectacles that obscured his eyes. He sported a well-manicured mustache and a neat comb-over that looked more like a detailed sculpture than actual hair. His attire was conservative and academic. He gave the impression of a seasoned college professor. Under one arm he held a leather folder, and the other a chamber stick and lit candle. Apparently it was quite dark in the other parts of this building. "Thank you for coming, Raleigh. I know you're busy with a class this evening," Oliver remarked as Raleigh crossed the room to sit at the empty chair at the head of the table. "They're a smart bunch, this one," Raleigh replied and sat down, putting the folder and candle on the table. "A few problems with tardiness, but I suppose that's to be expected."
How about we have a look at that will, Bookworm, and then we can talk about the new initiates all you like," Araminta jeered.
"Always so polite. Remind me why we haven't assigned you to our public relations team yet."
Ladies, gentlemen, I think in this matter I agree with our head of security. Abigail placed her hands on the table, commanding the room's attention with her soft but authoritative voice. Time is of the essence here. Raleigh, we are aware that you are the executor of Richard Dorr's last will and testament. I realize the beneficiaries might not all be present, but we, as the four founders, well, I should say 3 founders, agree that we must know what the late professor has bequeathed to whom. Many valuable resources remain in his home at the corner of Benefit and Benevolent Street. If we have no legal right to them, we must make urgent contact with whomever does.
We've heard a rumour that his housekeeper, Juno Mason, got everything the old man had to give. His home, his money, everything.
Araminta glowered and stirred her drink with her finger. "Whatever the case may be," Oliver chimed in, "we believe we have the right to know. Ultimately, though, as the executor of his will, it is up to you to decide." Raleigh looked around the room, his eyes landing on each of the 3 founding members of the Hunter's Hope Club in turn. What an uncoordinated, unorganized, and dysfunctional group they were. It never made any sense to him why Richard Dorr would have appointed these 3 people, so differing in their ways, as the main decision-makers of his organization. Nevertheless, they had somehow managed to keep the HHC running smoothly for the last 6 years. Dorr trusted them, and for all their flaws, Raleigh believed that this was still worth something. "Very well," he said finally. "I see no harm in it. Or, rather, that I see greater harm in waiting for the remaining beneficiaries to answer my summons. I've sent word to the professor's only son, Argyle Finch, but even if it reaches him, I doubt that he will be able to return to Providence even within the next month. Maeve Finch, the boy's mother, could be dead, for all we know. I wrote to her hometown in Ireland, but Dorr had little communication with her before he passed. And, as you all know, his housekeeper, Juno Mason, is currently being held for murder charges. Not sure when we'll be able to get her in here."
"So she is mentioned in the will?"
Araminta leapt out of her seat and pointed at the leather binder. Raleigh raised a hand. "Shall I read it?" he asked in a scolding tone. Araminta sat back down slowly, her brow more furrowed than ever. Raleigh cleared his throat and unfastened the straps that held the folder closed. A small, shimmering creature crawled out from within, like a brass scorpion, with elaborate, seemingly man-made limbs and a single polished jewel on its face. It stood at attention beside the folder, seemingly scanning the room for anyone listening who oughtn't be. "The last will and testament of Richard Zachary Dorr, as transcribed by Raleigh White. Honored friends, family, and those whom I consider as both, I write to you from a place of peace, my final rest. It may be that it's my first proper rest in some time. I have ever lived in the pursuit of knowledge, and perhaps now, as you read this, I have found answers to my most perplexing questions. I do not envy the living, for I have no doubt left a sizable mess to be sorted in my absence. I hope in time you come to forgive me. Do not envy me, for death robs us of our greatest strengths as human beings, our passion, our curiosity, our ability to enact meaningful change. Treasure these gifts as I have in life, and anticipate death, but do not dread it. Treasure also what little I have to leave behind now that I am gone, for treasures there may be in places yet unlooked. To my only son, Argyle, I leave my library of personal logs. You carry your mother's name, and I cannot fault you for this. A father I may be in the strictest biological sense, a man who nurtures, supports, and loves. This I never was. Alas, I see you now in my mind's eye only as a boy, bright-eyed and spirited. You are a man now, though I will not live to see you as such. May my journals provide you some insight to whom your father was, not so you may grieve my loss, but to learn from my mistakes. There is no legacy greater than growth. To my beloved Maeve, I leave my collection of opalized fossils. This truly was our collection, though you left it behind when we parted ways. You always saw beauty where others cared not to look, and I am glad it was so. For no one else in this or any other life is deserving of all the magic this earth has to offer more than you do. Look on these treasures and think not of the man who failed you, but of the other secrets the world yet conceals and the beauty that awaits you therein. To my dearest friends and colleagues, Abigail Malacostra, Araminta Kane, and Xianping Chao, I leave in your worthy hands full authority over the Hunters' Hope Club as co-directors. We have had the privilege of working alongside one another for over half a decade now, and I can think of no one better suited to continue my work than you three.
Who the hell is Shan Ping?
Abigail interrupted. She was slumped back in her chair with her arms crossed. That's my real name, Oliver said quietly. I chose to go by Oliver after my parents passed. It was hard to find work with a name like Shan Ping. Only the professor ever used it to address me. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Keep reading, Raleigh. Raleigh nodded and continued. Abigail, your contributions to our organization go far beyond monetary support. Your insight, patience, and strength of will cannot be measured in dollars and cents. You see more than most, and know more than any. We will fail without you at the helm. Of this much I am sure. Keep close your valuable connections, yes, all of them, and never falter. Your place is here, among we who know you as a friend first, and an asset last. Araminta, you are as determined as you are clever. I know most will only see the fire, not the trail it blazes behind, but don't let their doubt subdue you. You think practically, a skill much needed amidst our hypothetical minds. Take action when others wait for permission, but leave room for others to follow in your lead. I trust you with the safety of all that I have worked to build. The HHC is secure in your able hands. Jianping, my disciple, among us number many brilliant minds, scientists and engineers, but yours is truly one of a kind. There is a beautiful intersection between curiosity and creativity, where art and science meet to create impossible and wonderful things. This is your greatest strength. You shall continue my work as head researcher, log the Enigmorphs, and fill the Lexia Nominatus with information. Knowledge is power, but it is only the beginning. You must be the one to apply what we learned for the betterment of humanity. I will rest easy, knowing you are there to carry on that which I could not finish. And finally, to my housekeeper and closest confidant, Juno Mason, I leave my fortune, my house at Benefit and Benevolent, and all the treasures that lie therein. So it is true! Araminta sprang up again. As I live and breathe. Abigail put a hand to her mouth. Wait, everything in the house? Oliver leaned forward and cocked his head. Shall I continue? Raleigh asked, looking around the room. His scorpion companion reared up and snipped its pincers menacingly. I've heard enough, Araminta shouted and flung her arms in the air. Some lovely words from our late great leader. Well, a fat lot of good he's doing us now. What was that old fool thinking? The HHC is secure in your capable hands, Araminta, and yet you give away everything you own to some illiterate maid? Now, I won't hear that kind of talk against Juno Mason. Abigail was standing now too, with both hands flat on the table. The woman has done you no wrong, and has every right to her inheritance. She is kind, intelligent, and more capable than you give her credit for. Dorr saw that in her. Why question his judgment? Oh, sure, great judge of character that man was. Too bad the self-same woman he decided to leave all of his stuff to stabbed him in his sleep. Works out real nice for her, doesn't it? A mansion and a fortune to raise that bastard child of hers. I wager she got tired of waiting for the old man to die and took matters into her own hands. Juno Mason knew nothing of her inheritance before the murder. She still doesn't, Raleigh interjected. Until this moment, the only two people to have read the will of Richard Dorr were me and the benefactor himself. Well, maybe she just had a hunch, or maybe she was just getting tired of kissing the geezer's backside. Either way, she don't deserve any of that money more than the rest of us do. You said it yourself, didn't you, Oliver? Now more than ever the people of this city are in danger. What can we do to help them without the funding of the man who built this place? This has never been about money, Araminta, Oliver cut in. He was leaning forward in his chair, his hands folded and pressed against his chin.
Dor's work continues through us, and we must find our own way forward. He had faith in us, even to his very last. Is that not enough for you?
Faith in you and Abby perfect posture over there. He couldn't say enough kind things about you lot. Me? I'm just a tool that gets the job done, ain't I? If I break, throw me out behind the barn and buy the next new model. I could have done more. I could have tried harder. He didn't see. I didn't think I'd never get the chance again to prove him wrong.
Her voice trailed off and she slumped back in her chair. Her hair was uncharacteristically disheveled, and for a split second the other people in the room thought they saw an emotion other than anger pass over her face. Was it remorse? Grief? Shame? Araminta, I can't speak for the professor, though I hope you heard his words as I did. You possess a strength unlike that of anyone else among us. He never saw you as a tool. You are here for a reason. Dor recognized something in you that was special, irreplaceable. I could take my guesses as to what this may be, but you won't hear it until you figure that out for yourself. Abigail spoke much more kindly than before. Oliver cast a sympathetic glance towards Araminta. We all miss him, he offered. And we all had more we wished we could have said before he'd gone. There was a silence in the room for that moment. Araminta struggled as if she was repressing some sharp pain in her stomach. Abigail sat with her hands on her lap, her black eyes darting back and forth around the room. Oliver looked pensive, his hands covering his mouth and his brow furrowed. Raleigh tentatively closed the folder, and his scorpion companion scurried up his sleeve and onto his shoulder. Finally, Raleigh spoke. Is there anything I can do to help, Directors? The other three looked up at him. Oliver sat up and sighed. Finally, he drew himself to his feet. Even when standing, his chest and shoulders did not reach high over the table. He might have looked foolish, if not for the strong resolve in his eyes. Abigail and Araminta looked at him expectantly. I will pick up where Dor left off. In his home there remains still several years' worth of catalogued research. Until we can access it, I will do what I can to fill in the gaps. I have several volumes of my own research notes, but they will need to be cross-referenced by our current field agents. We can't afford to have any lapse in information, especially not when it comes to the Enigmorphs. Now Abigail stood, and Mr. Mulligan hurried to her side. We have no need to concern ourselves with funding. I will be able to secure donations from our sponsors and patrons, as I always have. Any further gaps in the budget left by Dor's absence, I will be able to supplement with my own private contributions. Moreover, I will see what can be done about Juno Mason and her current legal troubles. She may be in danger while not under our direct surveillance. I will ensure that she remains safe, and perhaps we may learn what she knows. Abigail and Oliver now turned to face Araminta, who remained seated. She looked at them both in turn, then sighed. No doubt Caradon has heard about all this by now. He'll be looking to make a grab for power in the professor's absence. What's more, I think Abigail may be right about Juno. Whether she's killed the man or not, we need to get to her before that grey bastard does. She's going to have the answers we need. I'll look to hire some more staff for security detail. Raleigh, you said this new batch of initiatives had potential, no? Raleigh perked up and nodded in response. Oh yes, very sharp. But they still have more to learn before we send them out to the field. We may have to forego a formal education, Raleigh. Oliver started to gather the papers that lay before him. He adjusted his glasses and addressed the room. Right now, we need all the help we can get. Wow. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed these stories. I have plans for more exciting Enigmorph content coming soon. Similar to the lecture series, but a little more in-depth and maybe less frequent. Hopefully you guys like them. Happy Halloween, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.